my history with Fred Whipple was interesting. So when I was a grad student, and when I was an undergrad, my advisor was Paul Hodge, who went to school at Harvard, and he worked for Fred Whipple. And so I'd heard a lot about what Whipple had done. Whipple had the theory of how comets work, the snowball theory with snowball. The comets were a mixture of rock and ice, and got heated by the sun. So Paul, when he was at Harvard, he worked mostly on astronomy, but he also dabbled in some cosmic dust stuff. So when I took a course from Paul at Berkeley when I was an undergrad, I was kind of curious about the dust business, and so I actually built a high altitude balloon experiment to collect it. We never recovered it, but it was a kind of exciting thing to do. And then later on, in times I had many contacts with Fred. Fred would come to meetings, and he was always kind of a godly figure because he'd done really quite fundamental things. And he was like famous among the comet people because it's hard to imagine right now, but people would give talks and they have things projected on the wall, and there was almost always a lack of pointers. There were no laser pointers at that time, but Fred would come up and he had an expandable pointer. Looked like a pen that he'd pull out, and he was always so proud to have this pull it out, and he would pull it out at the beginning of the meeting, and the whole meeting people would use Fred's pointer to point out things on the screen. But then I was at a meeting, I think it was in Cambridge, in Boston, and it was on comets. And I wasn't giving a talk or anything, but I talked to Fred and showed him some stuff that we were doing with high-altitude balloons. And this was a time when no one believed that anything like this was even reasonable. and it caught Fred's fancy, and he it was just amazing. He stood up in the meeting and he held up a picture that I showed him, and he pointed out that this is really important, and he said the organizers of this meeting should have this reproduced, turned into a slide, which was a technological feat to do at that time, and have Don talk about it at the meeting. So it was just absolutely amazing to be, so I actually had several things in my career that were kind of like that. It was just very famous people that somehow were convinced, and then they in turn convinced other people. Because generally people thought, working on cosmic dust was like a complete waste of time.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons was because why would you do it? Because these little particles falling into the Earth are just droplets of fusion crust from meteorites coming in, and it turns out they're not. The little particles were little particles in space. They're not chunks of, and they're different sampling, a better sampling of the meteoroid complex than meteorites. Almost all of the cosmic dust particles that are collected on Earth in the atmosphere and the surface are related to carbonaceous chondrite meteorites, which are extremely rare meteorites. Most meteorites are called ordinary chondrites, which are almost unrepresentative in the dust, and it's because of the selection effects of how materials get to Earth and how they survive atmospheric entry. But it's interesting and ironic that the little particles are actually in certain ways are the best samplings of the most primitive materials in the solar system.
I agree absolutely, and the biggest questions. When did it turn into more acceptable science?
It was in the 60s.
Yeah.
In the 60s. So
any particular event or publication?
No.
No.
I don't think so.
Just gradually.
It happened gradually.
Evolving into it.
So, in the early days of space, there have been numerous experiments, rocket collections and satellite detections and so forth, and they indicated there was very high flux of these particles. So, the initial interest in dust by NASA and space people was that it was a hazard. A hazard for spacecraft.
Of course it is.
And now, the hazard still is a concern, but and it's a real concern. But it's the science that's most important. These are a way to get samples that we couldn't otherwise have, and they can tell us things that we actually wouldn't know without the samples. So.
Were you involved in the Gemini collecting, which disappeared? But was that a plan for?
No, we physically built the collectors in the physics building at the University of Washington.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I remember, it was interesting. There wasn't the agony you had to go through in those days because everything. Space was in a real hurry to get people on the moon.
Yes,
and we did shake. There were shake tests done on what we made and stuff, but not this normal rigor that you go through now.
No,
and so we built it, and basically they flew it.
Fantastic!
So,
it's just incredible.
Yeah. So I remember one of them. Friend and I, we had to put these metallic coatings on these glass slides, each one about 2 by 3 centimeters squared, and the vacuum system we had in the department broke, and we had to take it apart, and we were up all night long.
Yeah.
Because we had to get it in the mail the next day.
Yeah.
And we sent it off, and I remember sitting it off, and the sun came up, and we went and had breakfast somewhere, and we took it to the mail, put it in the mail, and off it went, and then it went into space. And this was the one that was actually recovered by Buzz Aldrin.
Yeah, fantastic. So I remember reading that even Ninninger was interested in micrometeorites.
Yeah.
So where did he get the info or inspiration for that? Before
Harvey Ninninger, I don't know, but he would probably, because Meteor Crater in Arizona is surrounded by tons and tons and tons of iron spheres from the impact.
Yes, I've seen some of them.
And so so they had electromagnets they dragged around the crater to collect meteorites, and they collected lots of these little things. So he probably got interested, but I remember he gave a talk at a Meteorological Society meeting I think he went to the Galapagos of all places, but it was some distant place, and he was looking at little hollow places that would be collection basins. Like an ideal thing would be a granite outcrop with a little pond in it that was normally full of water.
Absolutely.
And particles would fall into it, and they've been doing it for thousands of years. And it's. I mean, you would probably have a field day looking at places like
the first like U.S. Fresh micrometeorite I found was in Canyon de Chelly.
Oh God, that's amazing!
In exactly a slope like you described.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the first one.
That's sandstone, probably though.
Yeah, but it was very clean and no cracks or anything. Just a trace.
I had never done that were taking that kind of thing seriously. But I thought about it, and I thought, well, you want to go to a place where there's just some limestone deposit,
with less
carbonates,
exactly,
where there's no magnetic materials, but like atolls are made by coral, and ideally they shouldn't have any magnetic materials.
But Nininger is reputedly described as bringing his teapot in the snowy mountains, melting snow, and finding metal spherules. But he also noticed that the closer he came to cities, the higher number of these spherules. So he concluded they were all anthropogenic.
Okay.
So that's when he threw in his towel. But somehow he was on the trace of something.
Yeah, well, he I mean, he's spent his life, searching for meteorites, and an interesting connection is that there are things called meteorite stars.
Okay.
Which I think there's some pictures of one or some in some meteoritics example. So he made them for Stardust, the casino in Las Vegas.
Oh.
and they were made. He made and they were things you could put on the wall, and they were shaped like stars, but they were made out of a large number of iron nickel spherules from Meteor Crater, Arizona, that he had collected.
Yeah.
And he basically glued them on this thing to make those stars. They're called meteorite stars.
Ah.
So I don't know if I could find.
I'd Google it and probably find some.
Yeah, I have seen one. I think there's one. I'm pretty sure that there's one at the meteorite collection in Arizona State.
Okay.
So have you been to that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great meteorite
and
collection.
I also visited the meteor crater and the museum there, and asked to take some samples on the rooftop.
Oh yeah.
But I was not allowed to enter the roofs.
Really?
No. Yeah, it's like you said before, it's so many regulations and security precautions.
Well, a lot of roofs are not made very well. They're tar,
good for me.
And so if someone walks on them, they might leak. Let's see. I'll look. I just typed in meteorite star. Let's see.
Hey. No worries. Yeah, no, I just took the
Meteorite star.
Good. I just did a long take. The good moments are good moments. There's a lot of finding focus if I went really long, but there's good hand faces, kind of just, a lot of different stuff. But there's a lot of
Well, I don't know.
No, I'll search for it.
Yeah.
I just wonder about this picture. Is this from your ocean floor?
Yeah.
So how did that come to happen? That you started?
We collected these particles in the stratosphere.
Yes.
Balloons. And the first one was a sphere, and I knew about the Murray and Renard thing, and so I tried to get someone to look in Pacific red clay, and I couldn't. So decided to just do it ourselves, and then we asked around, and then we got literally, a couple 100 pounds of red clay. From maybe 500 pounds of red clay from oceanographers and down here.
So, was it far from shore?
Yeah.
Just mid ocean.
Yeah. It has to be. Yeah, it can't be close to shore.
No,
it's got to be very, very far away. And anywhere there's deep water, it's a sedimentation rate has to be low.
Yes.
And so we actually first did this with in shallower water with what's called Globigerina ooze, and it's white.
Okay.
And it's carbonate.
Okay.
Stuff, and we actually found some particles in it.
But did you have magnetic extractions
Yeah,
down there,
yeah.
or
No,
collecting?
we just from samples.
All right, so it's already
That
the magnetic.
Yeah, and we did this in a pretty crude way. We just took like a plastic 55-gallon drum and pour water in it and put mud in it, and we put it like a big stir with a motor, and then we would hang a little magnet thing in there and just let it run for hours or days or whatever, and eventually the particles come up and get stuck on the magnet.
Amazing.
So, but then we got the idea of there was Brun et al. Was maybe it's from Denmark, I don't know, but somewhere in Scandinavia, and he had taken a wooden plank and pounded some magnets in it, and they dragged it behind a deep sea dragging thing, and collected spheres.
Wow.
And then a guy named Finkelman had they took manganese nodules and crushed them.
Yeah, you
And
mentioned
find
that.
these really high, and that was amazing. And they were finding like it's 100 times concentrated over what it is in the sediment. But manganese nodules stay on the surface.
Yeah.
The surface builds up.
Yeah.
But and they're older, much older than the substrate. So
Amazing.
They're sitting there for, millions of years, and they're basically catchment basins for. So another thing that I found that even though the geology reports show these pictures like this, they're clearly stony spheres.
Absolutely. Yes.
But all the later stuff just mentioned iron spheres.
Oh, okay.
And so I think if you take sediment and just look at it, you see iron spheres because they're shiny, they really stand out, and the stony ones are you love them, but they're to a crummy microscope they're dull looking things. And
they are dull.
They don't stand out as much, and most of them aren't as round as the iron spheres are rounder.
Yeah.
They get hotter.
Here we go.